I am a little bit worried about talking about death. I told the worship team this morning that this seems as if we are already premature in talking about death and life, since Easter is just around the corner. But I think it's important that John gives us this story because the reality is that death is the enemy of life. As soon as we breathe our first breath, death begins asserting its prerogative over us. And when we gain consciousness that at some point we are going to die, subconsciously, I think we begin to live in a way in which we hope will forestall death's inevitability. And we know death to be merciless and cruel. If you have ever lost someone, you know that death not only robs us of the ones we love, but it has the potential to disrupt the lives of those who are left behind. You see, death leaves so much sorrow and brokenness in its wake. And that means then that the fear of death distorts how we relate to each other and how we treat each other and how we think about our own lives. So we need to wrap our minds around exactly what Jesus is confronting in his encounter with Lazarus. He is confronting a force that has a powerful hold over human existence. Now, we cannot read John's accounts of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead without seeing it as a foreshadowing of Jesus' own crucifixion and resurrection. We'll get to it. But if that's all we take away from it, then I think we will miss a very powerful message about what it means for us, what it means for the world, what it means for our understanding of the cosmos. That Jesus is the anointed one of God. And in Jesus, there is the promise of life. Again, the promise of life. The promise of life, even though death is something that every human being will experience. In Jesus, death meets its match. In the first words of this Gospel of John, the evangelist of John directly declared it clearly and very deliberately that what has come into being with Jesus is life. When Jesus arrives, what really walks in our midst is life. Then John says that life is the light of all people. When Jesus' friend Lazarus falls ill, you know it and I know it. We read it and we say, oh, this is not going to end well. And then on the other side, we say, oh, this is going to end well. Because after all, it's Jesus. He just healed a man born blind. And he did so many other things. And we can't forget, at the beginning of this gospel, he turned all that water into wine. So Lazarus being ill, maybe, just maybe, this might turn out all right. But sneak in the back of our mind, this may not turn out well. And yet Jesus is determined to reveal that death will not overcome life. And you know what? Then I know it assaults our sensibilities to read that Jesus doesn't run immediately to be with his friend upon hearing that he is sick. Jesus, what are you waiting on? You've been running around here healing folk and giving people their sight. Get over there and help out Lazarus. And yet Jesus doesn't seem to be concerned. And we only learn of Lazarus' death when Jesus says it. He informs his disciples, Lazarus is dead. And then that's when Jesus decides to go. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, are racked with grief and are a little bit annoyed with Jesus. You know, it was that Minnesota way of saying it. Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus did not take the bait. Jesus actually consoles Martha with the truth that she only partially understands right now. Lazarus will rise again, Martha. Death will not have the last word. And she responds that, oh, I know, Jesus. In the end, we have to wait till it's all over. And then all of us will rise again. No, Mary, Martha, don't you hear what I'm saying? I am the resurrection and the life. I am it right now. I am it. I'm standing before you. I am life. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. I'm standing in your midst. She still didn't get it because death has a hold over us. Death is inevitable. And so we say, oh, nobody can conquer death. But it was enough for Martha. She says, with confidence in that moment, she could declare it even at the moment of her broken heart. Even this death created a whole huge hole in her family. She can say with confidence that Jesus is the Son of God. And in his presence, it all makes the difference for us. I know, I'm comforted, but she still doesn't get it because we are enthralled to death. She doesn't realize how consequential and eternal that Jesus' presence is right then and right there. I am life, Martha. I am life, Martha. There is death right here, but I am life, Martha. But she doesn't realize it. Mary doesn't realize it either, and her grief is overwhelming. The mourners who gathered around them, they don't realize it either because all they can keep thinking is, why couldn't he keep Lazarus alive? Why couldn't he heal Lazarus? We just heard about him giving that man born blind sight. They didn't realize that there was life in their midst. And John says Jesus is disturbed. Jesus is greatly disturbed. What that means, I tell you, Jesus was annoyed. Jesus was annoyed because all that they could see in the midst of life was death. They were enthralled to it. They couldn't even get over it. Jesus' strong show of emotion, Jesus wept. But Jesus was annoyed. Jesus' strong show of emotion, a mix of anger and agitation, may indicate for Jesus his own realization that death is just the single most important source of anxiety. Death is the anxiety-producing thing. I'm going to die someday. And so he's got to reveal God's glory. He's got to reveal God's glory. He's got to tell them, he's got to show them that life had arrived. So take me to the tomb. Oh, Jesus is so humble. If that were me, I probably would say, take me to the tomb. But Jesus is life. Take me to the tomb. And this is how I know that Martha was still enthralled to death. Oh, Lord, it's been 4 days. He stinks. It's a stench. He's dead. It's over. Life is here, Martha. Life is here. They go to the tomb, and Jesus, with the brio of only a Savior, Lazarus, come forth. And John tells us that Lazarus walks out of the tomb. And Jesus says, unbind him and let him go. Jesus conquered death. Life prevailed. Life found a way. And all those who were there, they saw it, that somehow life in the midst of death, life found a way. Oh, I'm going to disabuse you of any notion. I don't have any idea what happened. Let's get that out of the way right now. I have no idea what happened. There is no science or history to which we can appeal to figure out what happened on that day. But what is demonstrated in that very moment, in that story, in John's account, in Mary and Martha's account, what happened that day was what John said at the beginning of that gospel, that the life came into being, and the life was the light for all people. Life was there. Death met its match. And what was demonstrated there is that this life that we understand, this thing that we know to be alive solely in the body, all of this life is not demonstrated in what you see in your presence right now. That somehow, beyond all that we see, beyond this biological experience, there is life coming out of somewhere. Death is not it. And I know you're saying, Pastor, why you want me to know that death is not it? Why do you want me to, why should we understand it that way? What is the point of knowing that death isn't it? Because if there is to be life, if there is to be more than just existing in this life, if there is to be more than what you see around, if there is to be more to our experience as a human family, if there is to be more to our existence and our identity as God's beloved, if there is to be more than what the world keeps telling us is only it, if there is to be more than just violence and hatred and division, if there is to be more than everything we see, then we have to know that we live even though we shall die. There has to be more. If Jesus demonstrates power over life and death, then who he says he is and the belief he is creating in every one of us are true. Oh, I know. Martha and Mary and the mourners said it can't be true. It can't be true. If Jesus has the power of life, then the powerful can't control people with their power over us to take our lives. If Jesus has the power of life, then the world can no longer use the fear of death to control us. No one can use the fear of death to control us. Oh, I've heard it said many times before. My father used to say it. The scariest people in the world are the people who don't have anything to lose. And so when the world comes after us, when people say that the power of death I hold over you, when we have the power of life, oh, we don't have to act in fear. You see, I think the fear of death is the reason why we hoard, why we hate one another, why we believe that everything is about scarcity, that there isn't enough for everybody to go around. We protect ourselves because we fear death. We want more and more because maybe I'll be alive. Find it hard to be honorable and loyal to each other because we're afraid that it just isn't enough time. The fear of death distorts. But if we live and live abundantly, live. The inevitability of death will not destroy us. And see, that's what is so concerning. And I think that's what was concerning to Jesus. That everybody who saw Lazarus die, including Mary and Martha, they were living their lives preparing for death instead of living their lives preparing for Jesus. They were living their lives preparing for the end. They were not living their lives preparing for what was going to happen after the wilderness. And so during this season of Lent, I think the invitation to us is to stop just existing and start living. Start embracing the life that God has for us. That in the giving up all the things that have been distorting you, that you take on all the things that give you life. I think the invitation is go ahead and die to all the things that separate us from God. Go ahead and die to the things that bring you so much pain. Go ahead and die to the things that don't give you what you need. Let it go. It's okay. Lay it down and die. And then do it like Lazarus. Come out of that darkness. Come on out and shake off those binding clothes. They didn't say it, but I'm assuming that Lazarus danced a little jig. I'm free. I'm out of the dark tomb. These binding clothes are gone. Let me dance a little bit and shake it off and forget about all the things that held me bound. I'm going to live. I'm going to live. That's the invitation. Oh, stop worrying about it. Don't worry about what happens way off. And stop planning for your funeral. And stop worrying about it. And embrace the life that Jesus brings. And remember it, even every time it looks like you are succumbing to that death, just know on the other side of it, there is life. And I'll leave you with this, because I know it still may be a little like, I still can't quite get what that pastor's talking about. Let me put it this way. There is life, whether you're walking up on this earth or you're buried beneath it. There is life when you are mourning and saying goodbye to the one that you love so dearly. That there is something going on that the world won't share with us, and the world doesn't know how to share with us. There's a truth. There's something more ultimate than the things that are so finite, and so limiting, and so fleeting. And if we live that way, without even anticipating or knowing what it looks like on the other side, well, we put away the fantasies of heaven and take on the promises of life. I don't think you heard it. Let me say it again. Put away that fantasy of heaven. That's a weird thing that we made up in our minds. Put that away. But embrace the promise of life. The life that's made possible in Jesus, who is life. The one who stood right in the presence of Lazarus and Mary and Martha. Life in the midst of death. That said that there is something bigger and more ultimate than the thing you fear most. That is the promise. Hold God to the promise and live.